Hello, friends. This is the weekend of January 2nd, 2022. It's the second Sunday of the season of Christmas, the 12-day season of Christmas. And we will be reading this weekend from John, the first chapter, verses 10 to 18. You probably hear several of these verses at Christmas Eve services. We read some of these verses every year ourselves. This is how it begins. He was in the world, that is the Word who became flesh. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become the children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This is he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me." From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. Well, you may remember the movie musical from the 60s, Mary Poppins. In that musical, she said at one point, "Well begun is half done." And so, since this is the beginning of a new year, we may as well begin it well. So how do we do that? Well, for the next month, I'm going to be going over the beginnings of Jesus' life and ministry. I'll talk about his baptism, his first miracle, his first volunteering job with the temple, and his first sermon. But for today, we start with our own first things, as we are related to this Jesus, this Jewish guy from the Middle East from 2,000 years ago. On this first weekend of 2022, I ask, who is Jesus to you? Who are you to him? What's going on between you two lately? Is the spark of your relationship still strong? Is it wavering? Is it burning continuously and comfortably? Are you almost out of fuel? If you were to sit down with him and renegotiate your relationship with him this morning, how would you begin? Jesus, this is how I feel about your place in my life right now. And then what would you say? It's a tough question, but it's one that comes directly out of the scripture reading from the Gospel of John. It's a familiar passage. As I said, we read it Christmas Eve each year. It might have become a little bit too familiar. So, like a husband who hears his wife of 27 years say something at a dinner party that he never expected she'd say after all their years of marriage, and it just floors him, well, let's take a couple verses and give ourselves the capacity to be stunned. The first surprise comes in this little word, all, as in, to all who received him. Now that hardly sounds like it's worthy of a second thought to us, but the idea of all was quite the shocker in Jesus' day, and it's still pretty unusual. Not completely, but it's pretty unusual among the world's religions. Who can be a child of God? All who attach themselves to Jesus. Not all who are born in a certain caste, or clan, or class. Who can be a child of God? Everyone. Everyone, not just descendants of Abraham or of the families of Islam, or for that matter, people who subscribe to a particular philosophy of life. I could offer you a vast list of all the things that differentiate people from one another, all the ways we make labels. You're this, you're that, you're the other thing. None of it would make an iota of difference in terms of how people come to God as sons and daughters. The word is direct, and it's clear, and it's plain. All means all means all means all, period. Chew on that for a while this afternoon. You'll see how astounding it really is and how different it is from just about every other field of life. The saying continues, to all who receive. Well, how actually does a person receive Jesus? Is it a matter of reciting a particular prayer that's written on some tract somewhere? Or do you receive Jesus by going to a Billy Graham crusade and walking forward at the end? Maybe we receive him when we light our candles on Christmas Eve. Or perhaps you're one of many folks who aren't able to identify a particular moment before which you didn't have a relationship with Jesus, before which you didn't receive him, and then one day you did, and then everything changed after that. Well, we don't have to overcomplicate the thing. It's actually the best time of year to be mulling this over, because the Greek word for receive here is the same kind of notion as when someone hands a Christmas present to you. You hold out your hands, then you grasp it, and you gather it to yourself. For a moment, your heart grows just a wee bit more tender to the person who is giving you the gift, even if it's socks or a tie or a new oven mitt. A grace of a certain sort was offered to you, and you took it. You received it. You received it. Well, Jesus is a gift too, isn't he? God so loved the world that he gave his only son. That's a gift. And here we go again with another kind of surprise. If God should come among us today, how many of us would first want to get closer to him? Now I want you to be a little careful as you think about that question. Don't give yourself too much credit, because remember, from almost the beginning of the Bible to the end, whenever God shows up, the first word that God or an angel or whatever has to say is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. That's people's normal first reaction to God, is to tremble with fear. Well, isn't that what the angel said on the night of Christmas? Be not afraid, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. This is true in all the world's faiths as well. If their God were suddenly to appear, the natural response is awe and humbling yourself and cowering and by all means keeping your distance. But this God comes close and asks to be received as a gift, drawn near, drawn close to you, closer than close really. We receive Jesus straight to the core of our thoughts, our motives, our actions, our feeling, straight, as the metaphor says, straight to the heart. We receive him. We receive him. Okay, but specifically, how does that work? What does that mean? We know the routine with Christmas gifts. You unwrap the wrapping paper and you open the box and you give it a look of surprise. Oh, even if you're kind of faking it, you smile at the giver of the gift and you say, thank you, oh, thank you. It's a ritual. But how do you receive a person? How do we unwrap a Jesus? Let the scripture be our guide, where it says in the very next part of that verse, to all who believed in his name. We receive Jesus by believing in his name. Now that can sound a lot like agreeing, as in all who agree that the articles of the Apostles' Creed are true. All of those folks are good to go with God, or all who subscribe to the Heidelberg Catechism or the Westminster Confession or the Helvetic Confession, or etc., etc., or members who believe in the principles of a certain denomination are good enough for God. Believing tends to have the flavor of intellectual assent, of being all about what happens in the noggin. There is something to that in believing, that's sure. But the word here, the Greek word, signals trust. It describes a relationship between two souls, not the relationship between a brain and what's written on a piece of paper. So how do you receive the gift God gives? How do you unwrap a Jesus? By submitting to him in trust. That's how you put the gift into action. You know, the way you wear a sweater that someone gave you to work, or you take the contents of your old wallet and put it into a new one, or you have a swig of the 18-year-old whiskey. You honor the giver of the gift. In this case, you honor God, the giver of the gift, by trusting Jesus. By trusting Jesus. Trusting him with your feelings, enough to let them all hang out in front of him. You don't have to do it in the public square, but with him. Trusting him with your career, enough to let his values infuse your choices. Trusting him with your children, enough to let them follow him as they see fit. Trusting our church, trusting your church to Jesus, enough to say, Lord, take my church, take this fellowship that I belong to and that I prize, take it and do with it whatsoever you wish. I don't know how to illustrate that any better than to remind you of a scene that folks who are frequent visitors here at United Reformed Church have seen for the last 5 years or so. You know, Jesus said, come into the kingdom as a child, and I can't help but think of our dear Savannah Schilling when I hear that. When she sees me or Tommy Hayes or a few other folks, her face beams, and she does that little thing where she gets her legs started to run over, and then she does her quick stepping little run, and she jumps into our arms, and we give her a big hug. We give each other a big hug. She does that because she believes in us. We aren't going to hurt her. We're going to love her just as she is. We don't know how long that'll last, that little girl thing. Things change as children grow, we know, but that's trust. That's trust, giving yourself over into someone's loving embrace. And that's how you unwrap a Jesus. Not by holding back, but by letting go, coming enthusiastically as a child. And isn't that exactly what John wrote? To all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become the children of God. Not the adults of God or the co-workers of God or the colleagues of God or anything like that, but children of God. I wonder sometimes if we'd be better off in the world if the word Christian had never been invented. The word barely appears in the Bible, only 3 times in the thousands and thousands of verses in the scriptures. I wonder what would happen if when someone asked me or you what religion you adhere to, if you had said, I am a son of God, or, of course, I am a daughter of God. Would they think we're crazy? Pretentious? Pompous? Holier than thou? Maybe that's what folks would think. But by grace, that's who I am, and that's who you are. And so the new year begins. How are you and Jesus doing at the beginning of 2022? All of you who are within reach of this message, receive him as a gift. Trust him as God's love in person, and come to his table as a child, known and loved to the very core. That's our message for this week. Next week, we're having something of a special Sunday in church. We're not able to perform the 12th night Boar's Head Festival next week. It takes months and months to prepare for that, and of course it's not good to be in crowds at the moment anyway. But we're going to have something of a special remembrance of that while we are together in worship next week at 10 o'clock. And I'll try to have something for you that works to that end for our bare bones meditation next week as well. Until then, may God bless you richly this day and every day. Go in peace.